Hello, hello. I'm Jordan, and this is my knitting YouTube channel, Andalusian Knits. And today I am coming to you with a video tutorial to show you how to create a custom and cozy garter stitch pillow cover. So I have designed this tutorial to be used with any kind of yarn you want to use and to knit any size pillow you want to knit so that you end up with the perfect pillow cover that you are looking for. And I've designed this tutorial with an early knitter in mind who is looking to grow their skills. So I'm going to assume that you're coming in knowing very few things. If you know how to cast on and cast off, if you know how to knit, and if you know how to do basic decreases, so knit two together and SSK, I can teach you literally everything else you need to know to complete a very cute and very custom pillow cover of your own. And we got a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started. And we are going to start with the materials you'll need to actually complete this project. Oh, one last thing. If you are somebody who prefers a written pattern over a video tutorial, I'm right there with you, and I have a written version of this pattern as well. It is available to download on Ravelry, and I will leave a link to it in the description below. Okay, so first let's run through a list of the materials that you're going to need to knit this project. And I'll start with a checklist, and then after that I will go back and talk about a couple things that you might want to consider with your materials. So as far as the list of things you're going to need, you'll need yarn and needles, duh. You'll need the pillow insert. You'll need 4 buttons, a tapestry needle, upholstery or sewing thread, and a measuring tape. So in terms of like materials for a knitting project, it's a pretty standard fare, but there are a couple things that you might want to consider when you are picking out your materials. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is yarn choice. And like I said earlier, this tutorial has been designed so that you can use any yarn you want, any size you want. But if you're feeling a little indecisive about what kind of yarn you want to use for this project, I do have a really nice, like, standard middle of the road suggestion for first timers, and that is to use a worsted weight acrylic yarn. And that is simply because a worsted weight yarn is sort of like right in the middle of the yarn weight, so it's not going to take forever to knit up or anything like that. And I suggest acrylic because in terms of like home goods like this, you're not going to beat the convenience in terms of washing it and in terms of how it's going to hold up over time. Acrylic is just a really good workhorse yarn for home good projects like a pillow cover. So that is the first thing to consider. And then the second thing that you should think about is the buttons that you're going to choose for the pillow cover. And once again, if you feel like the world's your oyster, go crazy. If you're a button expert, like, don't listen to me. But if you're unsure about what to get, I would suggest going with buttons like these that are approximately 1 inch across. And you definitely want to make sure that they are machine washable, especially if you are using acrylic yarn. So it would be really annoying to like make the pillow cover out of something that's machine washable and then like attach things to it that aren't machine washable. So if you're planning on, laundering the pillow cover in your washing machine, definitely go with buttons that can withstand that process. And then the last thing I want to talk about materials is choosing your pillow insert itself. And so if you haven't ever heard of a pillow insert before, this is basically just the thing that goes inside the cover. And it is very easy to find pillow inserts. They're widely available online. They're widely available in like the big craft stores. And I wouldn't be surprised, I haven't checked, but you probably would be able to find some in places like Walmart or Target as well. And they come in a bunch of dimensions, a bunch of different sizes, but most commonly you're going to find these pillow inserts as a square. Let's see if I can get it all the way in here. There we go, as a square, somewhere between like 15 by 15 inches to 20 by 20 inches. Those are going to be some really common dimensions you'll find for the pillow inserts. And this tutorial will work for any size square or any size rectangle. But like, once again, if you're feeling indecisive, for first timers, don't go crazy. Like, I would pick a nice, like, so for example, this is like an 18 by 18 inch pillow. This is a great like first choice if you've never done anything like this before. Just a very standard size, very easy to knit. Yeah, and in terms of like the quality, And the niceness, the softness of the pillow inserts, they run the gamut. You can go like dirt cheap. You can buy one of these for like $3 or $4, or you can go super expensive and get a really nice ergonomic, cooling pillow. Go crazy in terms of the pillow insert. But in terms of dimensions, I suggest a square somewhere between 15 by 15 inches to 20 by 20 inches. Now it's time to move on to everyone's favorite part of the knitting process, and that is knitting a swatch. And I know I can hear the groans through the camera, but just bear with me. Because this is a project where you can use any kind of yarn you want, there is not a specific gauge that you're trying to meet, but it's very important that you knit a swatch because you need to know what your personal gauge is with the yarn you're using. Otherwise, you're not going to know how many stitches you need to cast on to knit this pillowcase. So unfortunately, this is a project that does require a swatch. It doesn't have to be anything crazy though. This is not like trying to fit a sweater or a sock. It's not that high stakes. Just knit like a 4-inch by 4-inch garter stitch square, and we'll go over to the overhead now, and I'll show you how to measure that swatch and how to calculate your stitches and rows per inch from that swatch so that you can actually start knitting the project. Okay, we have our swatch knit, and now we need to figure out our gauge so that we know how many stitches to cast on for this project. And to figure this out, we only need 4 pieces of information. And this is a section where I would recommend just quickly grabbing a piece of paper and a pencil so that you can write these numbers down. There's no crazy calculations or anything like that, but there are a few numbers that you're going to need to remember and keep in your head, and it's just easier to write them down. And so those first 2 numbers you are going to want to remember are how many stitches wide is the swatch and how many rows tall is the swatch. And so how many stitches wide is the swatch? That's an easy question to answer. However many stitches you cast on to knit the swatch, that's how wide the swatch is. And in determining how many rows tall the swatch is, there's a quick and easy way to figure out, to count rows in garter stitch. And so if you kind of stretch out the garter stitch, you see that it's formed by all of these horizontal ridges that are stacked on top of each other. So I'm just going to very quickly count how many ridges I have in this swatch. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So I'm going to take that number, that 15, and I'm going to multiply it by 2 because 1 ridge of garter stitch in the fabric equals 2 rows of knitting. And so that means 15 times 2 is 30. So this swatch is 30 rows tall. So like I said, make a note of those 2 numbers. And then the other 2 numbers you're going to need are the measurements for the swatch. So get your tape measure out and first lay it flat. Make sure that the cast on edge is at the bottom and the bind off edge is at the top. And then just measure from side to side. So in my case, we're working with 6 inches. And then measure from top to bottom. And that looks to be about 5 inches on my swatch. And once you have those 2 numbers written down, that's all the numbers you have to do. That's all the measuring you have to do. We're going to go on now and figure out your gauge and how many stitches should be cast on for the project based on these numbers you just got. Now that we have our numbers, let's quickly figure out what our gauge is. And so to do that, to figure out our stitch gauge, you're going to take the number of stitches across and simply divide it by the measurement you found. So in my case, I'm going to take 20 stitches and I'm going to divide it by 6 inches, and that's going to give me a total of 3.3 stitches per inch. And it's as simple as that. One division equation is all you need to figure out your gauge. So let's do the same thing, but for the row gauge this time. It's the same process, same equation. You're going to take the number of rows you have and divide it by your measurement you took. And in my case, that is going to give me 6 rows per inch. And so now we have our gauge. We know how tightly we're knitting. Okay, so we've got one last number to find, and this one is the million-dollar question. How many stitches do I cast on for this project, and how long do I knit it for? And it's quite easy to find, but we need to think about the pillow cover's dimensions for just a moment. So if you already have your pillow insert, and I've talked about this in the materials section, It's going to come with some sort of dimensions, and usually, like I said, that's going to be somewhere between 15 inches by 15 inches to 20 inches by 20 inches. And you want to take however big your pillow insert is and subtract 1 inch from every side. So in my case, I have an 18 inch by 18 inch insert, and so I'm going to subtract 1 from that, and that's going to give me 17 inches. And because this is a square pillow, I don't have to do this calculation again. If you're using a rectangular pillow, you will have to do the calculation once more. So I want the pillow cover to be 17 inches, while the pillow itself is 18 inches, so that everything looks nice and stretched and full and not loose and sloppy. So I need my pillowcase to be 17 inches across, and to figure that out, I'm simply going to multiply that number, 17, times my stitch gauge, which is 3.3 stitches per inch. And that's going to give me a total of 56.1 stitches. And that number is going to look a little weird to most knitters, and we'll address that in just a moment. But let's figure out what the row gauge is going to be now as well. And once again, since I'm knitting a square, I'm using the same number, 17, but this time I'm going to multiply it by my row gauge, which is 6 rows per inch, and that is going to give me a total of 102 rows. Okay, so now I have all the numbers I need. I know how many numbers I need to cast on, and I know how many numbers I need to knit a square. Unfortunately, for this project, you're going to need a whole number for your stitch count, and 56.1 is not a whole number. Thankfully, it's not hard to fix in this scenario. All you're going to do is either round up, or in this case, round down to the nearest usable number. So I need a whole number, and I'm at 56.1, so I'm just going to split the difference and say I'm going to cast on 56 stitches. And as for the row number, that is fine. My number that I got here is fine. But if you get a number that is odd, you're going to want to round it up to an even number, because your row count needs to be an even number and your stitch count needs to be a whole number. And once again, I would recommend making a note of your stitch count and your row count just for sanity's sake, because you're going to be using those numbers to actually knit the pillow cover. Okay. Alrighty, we finally made it to the knitting. So let's talk through the construction of how this is actually going to be knit up. The pillow cover is knit in 2 parts. There's a front panel and a back panel, and then those 2 panels, after they're knit, are seamed together to create the actual cover. And I would suggest starting with the back panel because it is the simplest. And I've got an example here of one already knit up. And as you can see, the back panel is simply a garter stitch square, and that is where you will later go back and attach the buttons to. As you can see, they're already on here. And so, like I said, I suggest going with this one first because it's just a basic garter stitch square. So you'll just be casting on the number of stitches you determined in the last section, and you'll just be knitting the number of rows you determined in the last section. It's a very straightforward process for the front panel, or for the back panel. In terms of the front panel, it starts out the same as the back panel. It starts out as a garter stitch square, as you can see. No buttons on it this time though. But then after that, you go back and you add a flap to this panel. And I've actually got a second sample here to show you like what's going on and why that's important. Okay, so anyways, we've got the front panel knit up like a square like the back panel. And after that comes what I call this transition area. This transition where the front panel has to crest the top of the pillow insert and come back and fall down onto the back panel. And you want that transition area to be anywhere from like 2 to 4 inches. It's going to vary depending on how big your pillow is, but you want it to be able to fall over and like comfortably cover up the top of that pillow. And then after the transition area, you will go into some diagonal shaping. I call this envelope shaping here on the edges. And then finally, you'll also be adding in the buttonholes as well on the front panel. And if that all sounds confusing, don't worry. I'm going to pause now and I'm going to put up some screenshots of some drawn up schematics for the front and the back panel so that you can screenshot those if you like and keep track as you're knitting. Okay, I think that should do it. Now let's move to the overhead and I'm going to teach you the actual techniques that you're going to use in knitting these 2 panels. Like I said, I think that the back panel is the best place to start since it's a simple square, so I'm going to go ahead and show you that first. And so I've already got a little bit of my swatch going here, but first you're going to want to use the long tail cast on to cast on the number of stitches that you calculated in the section where we did our stitch count and our row count. So go ahead, use the long tail cast on, make that cast on, and we'll begin knitting now. So once that's done, this is a very simple, like I said, it's very simple. You're going to knit every row, and the only thing you're going to do is the first stitch of every row is going to be slipped purlwise with the yarn in front. And as you can kind of see already, that is going to create a row of stitches on the edge that just sort of lies nice and neat. And when we get to the seaming process, those slip stitches are going to make doing the seaming a lot faster and easier for you. So to do a row for the back panel, you're going to want to make sure that the working yarn is in front of your needle, your right needle. And like I said, slip that first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front, and then move the yarn back to the back to knit. And from there, you are just going to knit across the row. All right, back at the beginning of another row, just going to show the slip technique one more time. Like I said, make sure that the working yarn is in front of your right needle, and then just slip that first stitch purlwise and move the yarn back into position for knitting across the row. And that is all you have to do to complete this back panel. It could not be easier. So like I said, once you have hit your stitch or your row count for the back panel, once you have a square of fabric, go ahead and bind off all those stitches and move on to the front panel. Now we're moving into the instructions for working the front panel. And for a good long while, the front panel is going to be identical to the back panel. So go ahead and make your long tail cast on using the number of stitches you calculated you need for your stitch count, and go ahead and knit yourself a square using the row counts. But unlike the back panel, once you have that square, don't bind off the stitches. You want to keep knitting in garter stitch for another 2 to 4 inches, like I talked about, to accommodate the transition zone. And as a reminder, this transition zone is simply the place where the front panel starts on the front of the pillow. Let's say that this needle is the pillow insert. The front panel, is on the front side of the pillow, but then it's going to transition and move so that it falls about an inch or so onto the back of the pillow. So you need a couple inches to get over that hump. And exactly how many inches you need to get over that hump is going to depend on how big your pillow is, of course. So I would just recommend, as you're knitting that transition zone, just lay it against your pillow and see how far that flap is falling back onto the back side of the pillow. And once you've got a couple inches that way, it's time to start the shaping. So if you remember in the schematic that I showed you a moment ago, the envelope shaping is going to just kind of make the edges of this flap come in diagonally a little bit. And so to do that envelope shaping, it's very simple. You're just going to do some symmetrical decreases on both sides of the work. But like always, we are going to continue by slipping the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. That's always going to happen regardless of what we're doing. So after we've slipped that first stitch purlwise, you're going to knit 2 stitches, and then you're going to work an SSK. So that's S, S, K. And then from there, you're going to knit across the row until there are 5 stitches left on the needle. Now there are 5 stitches left on the needle, and from here, I am just going to knit 2 together, and then knit these last 3 stitches. And that is a right side row for the envelope shaping. Now for the wrong side rows, there is no shaping. It's just a plain row of garter stitch with that first slip stitch. So slip that first stitch and just knit across the row for garter stitch. And I will pause just a moment and put those instructions up on the screen so that you can screenshot that if you need to before we move on. Okay. Now there. And so that is the envelope shaping. And once you've started working the envelope shaping, you're going to want to do that for about 1 to 1.5 inches before you begin inserting the first row of buttonholes. So work 1 inch or so of that envelope shaping, and then I'll be back to show you how to do the buttonholes. The holes are worked in 2 parts. They begin on a right side row and they end on a wrong side row. And while you're working the buttonholes, you're still going to be doing the envelope shaping and the slipping of the first stitch. So let's take a look at what a right side row of these buttonholes is going to look like. And so, as always, we are going to slip this first stitch with the yarn in front purlwise. And now we are going to knit 2. And we're going to work an SSK. And now it's time to actually begin the buttonholes. And so we're going to start by knitting 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we are going to bind off this second stitch on the right needle. And you do that by picking it up with the left needle, passing it over the first stitch, and dropping it off the needle entirely. And then we're going to knit 1 more, and we're going to bind off this second stitch again. So pass it over the first stitch and off the needle. And so now we've bound off 2 stitches so far on this row. And from here, we are going to knit across until we reach 7 stitches from the end. All right, we're back. I've got 7 stitches left on the needle, and now I'm going to add the second buttonhole. And so I'm going to bind off a stitch like I did earlier by passing it over the first stitch and off the needle. Then I'm going to knit a second stitch and bind off another stitch. And then from here, I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to work the envelope shaping by doing a knit 2 together and knitting the final 3 stitches of the row. So that was part 1 of the buttonholes. You created the actual holes at this point, but they need to be closed up. And so we're going to do that on the wrong side. So like always, going to slip that first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. And then from here, I'm going to knit along this wrong side row until I reach the first big gap caused by the bind-offs from the previous row. So I've slipped a stitch. Now I'm going to knit across. Okay, I've reached the first gap. And so to close this gap up, we're going to actually cast stitches back onto the needle using the backwards loop cast on. This is a very simple, one of the most basic cast ons you can do. You may already know it, but if you don't, here's just a quick crash course. It's not hard at all. Take the working yarn, and you're going to take your left thumb and wrap a counterclockwise loop around your thumb, and then transfer that to the needle. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing to make a second loop. Wrap it around my thumb counterclockwise, transfer it to the needle. And so once I've cast on 2 stitches with the backward loops cast on, I am going to continue knitting across until I hit the second gap caused by the bind-offs from the previous row. Okay, are we at the gap? Yeah, here's the gap. And for this one, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to take the yarn, the working yarn, and do 2 backwards loop cast-ons right here. There you go. And then from there, it's just a matter of finishing up the wrong side row like normal. Just knit across. And that's that. So now you have your first set of buttonholes in the fabric. And when you knit across this row again, those stitches that you cast on, they're going to look and feel a little wonky. That's fine. Just like work with them the best you can. And then after you've got a row of stitches knit, then they'll start behaving a lot more normally. And now after you've made your first set of buttonholes, you're going to want to go back to knitting the envelope shaping for another inch to inch and a half before you insert your second set of buttonholes. So buttonholes, another inch, inch and a half of envelope shaping alone, and then insert your second set of buttonholes. And after that second set of buttonholes is complete, you're going to knit one final inch of plain garter stitch. So no more buttonhole shaping, no more envelope shaping, just plain garter stitch, taking care to slip the first stitch of every row like you have been doing. And once you've knit that additional inch, the front panel is finished and it is ready to be bound off. Now we have made it to the seaming. The end is in sight. It's getting closer, I promise. So now that you have both of your panels knit up, and I have a couple swatches here to use as examples, before you do the seaming, there's just a little bit of prep that you need to do. And first and foremost, this is when you're going to need your tapestry needle and some extra yarn to actually do the seaming. So go ahead and get the tapestry needle ready. And then as far as your panels are concerned, we're going to be seaming on three sides of these. So down one side, across the bottom, and then on the other edge as well. And so the top is going to remain open so that you can actually insert the pillow into it. And to get prepared for seaming, you want your front panel and your back panel, you want them to be touching with their wrong sides facing inward. And so if you're not sure about what is the wrong side and the right side of garter stitch, you're not alone, but there's actually a very easy way to figure out. So way back when we were casting these panels on, we used the long tail cast on to create those. And when you use the long tail cast on, it creates a distinct visual on the wrong sides and the right sides. So a long tail cast on edge on the right side looks like this. Oh, let's see if I can hold this horizontal bar of yarn along the bottom edge right here. It's just kind of like going this way, back and forth horizontally. So that's what the right side looks like on a long tail cast on edge. And then conversely, on the wrong side of a long tail cast on, you see at the bottom, we just have purl bumps here. There's no like bar of yarn or anything. So if you see just the purl bumps, you know that's the wrong side. And if you see the horizontal bar of yarn, that is the right side. And so you're going to take both of your panels and you're going to smush them together so that the wrong sides are inside and touching one another and that the cast on edges are at the bottom here. And once you've done that, it's actually time to start seaming. So let's go to the overhead and take a look at those techniques. And like I said, I suggest seaming this all in one go with a single piece of yarn so you don't have to worry about a lot of loose ends. And specifically, I suggest starting at the bottom and using 2/3 of the yarn to seam the bottom and up one side, and then come back to this final side and use the final third of the yarn to seam up that side as well. So side seams, not crazy, they're mattress stitch, and we'll get to that in a moment, but I do need to talk about the bottom seaming because it is a little bit different. So if we take one of these panels and we look at the bottom of the cast on edge, you see that the long tail cast on kind of creates what visually approximates a row of stockinette V's. And I will pop up a picture here with some of these quote unquote stitches highlighted so you can see what I'm talking about. But it's not really a line of stitches, but it looks like a line of stitches here on the bottom of the cast on edge. And so what we're going to be doing to seam this bottom edge is we're going to be inserting our tapestry needle underneath the legs of these stitches in sort of a serpentine weaving pattern back and forth to join the two panels of fabric together. So I'm going to get these restacked and I'm going to show you how to do that. You want to take your two panels so that the cast off edges or the cast on edges are facing up towards you and they're stacked together correctly. Remember, the wrong sides need to be touching on the inside. And the first thing you're going to do is find the first available quote-unquote stitch on the bottom of this cast-off edge on the left panel, which I've hooked right here, and slide your needle underneath both of those stitches, or both of those legs. And then let me pull this up here, make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, and then you're going to do the exact same thing on the right panel. You're going to go through the bottom legs of those stitches and pull through. And for this first pull, like I said, you're going to want to use about 2/3 of this to seam the bottom in one side and save 1/3 to come back and seam the other part as well. Okay, so I have slid the tapestry needle under the legs of the left panel and the right panel, and now I'm going to go back the way I came. Now I'm going to go right panel, left panel. So find the next available quote-unquote stitch and put the needle under the legs on the right panel, and then do the same thing with the legs on the next available stitch on the left panel, and pull through. And from here, you're just going to be doing that over and over again. Like I said, find the next available stitch on the left panel, needle through the legs, next available stitch on the right panel, needle through the legs, and pull through. And then one last time, find the next available stitch on the right, under both legs, next available stitch on the left, under both legs, and pull through. And that is literally all you have to do for the bottom seam. You're going to continue that pattern, left panel, right panel, left panel, all the way down to the bottom edge. All right, once your bottom seam is done, it's time to go up an edge using mattress stitch. And thankfully, mattress stitch is a little bit easier than the bottom seam. And on top of that, mattress stitch is particularly easy because we have been slipping the first stitch of every row, which has created these giant gaps in the fabric. And these gaps are exactly the path that our needle needs to travel as we're seaming up the side. So let's take a look at how mattress stitch works in this project. So like the bottom stitch, you're going to want to have your stitches, your panels arranged like a left panel and a right panel like this. However, with the bottom stitch, we were seaming left, right, right, left, left, right, right, left. But that's not what we're doing for mattress stitch. Mattress stitch simply goes left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. So when you seam one side, it's time to seam the next side. Much simpler. And like I said, we have this basically all of this giant map of holes telling us exactly where the needle needs to go. So to start this off, on the left panel, you're going to want to find that first big gap and go in that big gap and go underneath these bars of yarn and come out of the next available big gap and pull your yarn through. And then on the right side, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to look for that first big gap, and we're going to send our needle down there and run it under those 2 bars of yarn and come out the next available gap, like so. And I would recommend waiting a moment to tighten your seam, because when you just have a couple stitches seamed at first, it's going to look a little weird and wonky. But as you progress up the line, it's very easy to kind of pull and watch the fabrics zipper up on each other, and it'll look a lot nicer, and it will make a lot more sense once there are a few more stitches being seamed. So let's go a little bit further before we pull our yarn tight. So after that first set of seaming, you're going to want to look for the hole that the needle just came out of last time. So we're back to the left panel, and the needle came out of this hole. And I can tell that because the running yarn is coming out of that hole. So I'm going to go into that hole now, pick up this next 2 bars of yarn, and go out the next available hole on the left. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the right. I'm going to locate the last gap that I came out of, which is right here. So I'm going to go in it this time. I'm going to go underneath these bars of yarn and come out the next gap. And from here, you're just going to do that over and over again until the whole thing is seamed up. So like I said, On the left side, look for the last gap you came out of, which is right here, and go into it. Pick up those bars of yarn and come out the next available gap. And then do the same thing on the right side. Okay, and I will meet you in just a second when I have a few more stitches seamed up. Now that I have a good chunk of this side seam seamed up, I'm going to go ahead and give it a pull and tighten it up. So what you're going to want to do is sort of pinch on the bottom corner right here as you pull on the working yarn. And you'll see that starts to like tighten things up. And once you meet some resistance, kind of push it along like this so that the slack keeps getting taken up like so. And then you just keep pulling until everything has been tightened up the way it needs to be. Okay, and I will show you on a finished project now what these seams are going to ultimately look like. So I have a pillow cover in front of me now, and right now we are taking a look at the bottom seam. And as you'll notice, it's not an invisible seam. It's definitely visible, but I like that it feels and looks very structural. It gives, I don't know, some heft or something to the way that the pillow cover looks. So that one is supposed to be a visible seam, a highly visible seam. Now, on the other hand, the mattress stitch seams, while not completely invisible, like you can still see the line where the mattress stitch takes place, I really love this effect because it's just subtle enough that it's not like too distracting, but it looks like finished and professional. I really like that it's like an almost invisible seam here. So that's just a quick look at what your final seams should look like. So just as a refresher, the bottom seam is very visible and it should be kind of thick and feel structural and hefty. And your mattress stitch seams up the side should be almost but not quite invisible, just enough so that you can sort of like see a nice, clean, straight seam line. Okay. All right, well, we've made it to the buttons. We just got to push through a little bit more and we will be done with this thing. So just a little reminder, in terms of buttons, you're going to need 4 of these, and I suggest that they be approximately 1 inch across and that they should be machine washable. In terms of holes, 2-hole or 4-hole buttons will work. I happen to be working with 4-hole buttons. That's what I'll be using in the overhead examples, but 2 will work just as fine as well. So before we actually get to attaching the buttons, we need to prep our needle and thread. So once again, you're going to need your tapestry needle, and this time, instead of using yarn from the project, you're going to want to use upholstery or sewing thread. And I have upholstery thread here, and I believe, now don't quote me on this, I believe the main difference between regular sewing thread and upholstery thread is that upholstery thread is like super duper heavy duty and durable. Like this, I cannot break this stuff with my hands despite it being so teeny tiny, whereas sewing thread has a little more give to it. But yeah, when in doubt, go with upholstery thread because this stuff is not going to break on you. So for attaching these buttons, I suggest getting a length of this thread that's approximately the length of your arm, so kind of measure it out like that. That's not super important to be very accurate with this. You're definitely going to have more than you need, but when it comes to like something like a button, it's better to like end up with more than you need than less than you need. So go ahead and measure off a length of this thread and give it a snip. Oh my gosh, these snips. There we go. So now we have the thread, and we're going to want to take it and we're going to want to put it through the tapestry needle. And I suggest kind of doing the like a loop of that right there. It's going to be easier to push it through. Although the tapestry needle holes are pretty big, it's not going to be that difficult. And so then you're going to want to make it so that the needle is dropped down to the center of the length of thread. And so you've got the 2 loose ends hanging up here. There we go, needle and thread. And now from here, it's just a matter of tying a little knot into the end of this. And this doesn't have to be a super duper thick knot. We're going to be securing this in a couple different ways as we actually seam on the buttons. So just a single knot, that'll work, and it is time to go to the overhead and get to attaching these buttons. I have a pillow cover out here now because I want to show you how you're going to figure out where to place the buttons first. So go ahead, get your pillow cover out and stick your pillow insert inside of it. And then lay it so that the back panel is facing up like this. And then I'm going to take the flap and I'm just simply going to lay it down naturally and easily without stretching it or anything, like it wants to lay normally on the back panel. And from here, I'm going to take one of my buttons and I am going to slide it between this flap and the back panel so that those holes are centered right where they're peeking out in a buttonhole space, just like that. Okay? And then from here, I'm going to hold on to this button so that it doesn't move anywhere, and I'm going to pull the flap back to do the actual seaming. Now, I'm actually going to show you how to attach these buttons on a smaller swatch because I'm having a real hard time keeping this whole pillow in frame as I try to do this. So I'm going to move to the swatch now. But from here, once you have the button positioned, it's time to actually start the seaming. So I am back with a much more manageable swatch now, and I'm going to show you how to attach this button. So, like I said, it should be in this position that you want it to be, and you should hold onto it, secure it so it's not moving, but you don't want to put a death grip on it. You don't want to sort of like stretch or distort the fabric, just like keep it in place so it's not moving. A little shift left or right is not going to be a big deal, but don't just like have a death grip on it and distort the fabric around it. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to come in from the wrong side initially, and you're going to go through the fabric and just come up through any one of these holes you want to. Now, once again, I have a 4-hole button, but 2-hole buttons will work just as fine as well. And be careful as you pull through. You want to leave a little bit of a tail to secure. So don't pull all the way through, but pull until you got about like an inch or two of tail left. And then I'm going to go down through the buttonhole and back through the fabric to the wrong side. And now since I'm using a 4-hole button, I'm going to make an X shape with the thread. So I'm going to go down diagonally from the way that I came up. So go through that button. Oop, thing's a little stuck. There we go. And pull through. Okay. You don't want to pull too tight because, like I said, nothing is really securing that loose tail yet. But that's okay. We will do that in just a moment. And then from here, I'm going to come back through the wrong side, up through the fabric, and through a different hole this time. I'm going to come up through this hole right here. Pull. And then once again, I'm going to go down through the diagonal hole and back to the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, and so now I've made my first pass at the button. Now, in theory, you should only need maybe like 3 or 4 of these passes to really secure the button. But if you're like me and are a little bit neurotic and nervous about stuff like that and stuff falling off, it's totally fine. Like, it's not going to hurt anything to do more than 3 or 4 more passes. But really, all you should need is just a few more passes to really ensure that the button is attached to the fabric. So I'm going to do that now and just show you one more time. We're going to come from the wrong side. And we're going to come up through a hole, pull through, and then I'm going to go down through the diagonal hole back to the wrong side and pull my thread like so, and then come back up through a new hole and then back down through the diagonal hole. And there we go. And like I said, 3 or 4 passes like that should really secure the button, make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. Especially if you're using upholstery thread, this stuff is not going to break on you. So once the button has been secured like you'd want it to be, you're going to cut off some of these ends and tie some knots and neaten everything up. And I'll be the first to admit this is not the most elegant way to attach a button, but for something like a pillow cover where you're not going to be opening and closing the buttons over and over again like you might with clothing, like this simple way is the way to go. It's going to save you a lot of headache and a lot of heartache to just go this simple way for buttons that are more decorative than they are really like everyday functional. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to clip our yarn long enough so that it's going to be still possible to like tie some knots with it. So give yourself a couple inches of a tail like so, and then take that first tail you pulled through you have, and this last tail you have, and I just like tie 2 or 3 knots just to make sure that everything's secure. Double check on this side that you're not distorting the fabric when you tie the knot. Sometimes if you pull too hard, it can kind of stretch the fabric. So just kind of be cool. Tie a couple knots, pull them down to right where the button's attached. And then from there, it's just a matter of trimming off, oh my gosh, these snips, they suck. Trimming off these loose ends, if I can do that. Oh my Lord, don't fail me now. Okay, well that was embarrassing, but there we go. The button has successfully been attached. It's not going anywhere. It's reinforced with upholstery thread, and it's ready to go. And once you have the button attached, I would go ahead and like pull the flap back down and put the button through the buttonhole to make sure that the button fits, and B, to make sure that it's positioned correctly. And then from there, if everything looks good to you, then it's just a matter of attaching the other 3 buttons using that exact same process that I just showed you. Alrighty, well that's going to do it. If you've been crafting along, then you should have a custom and cozy knit pillow cover of your own at this point. These things are so awesome. This is absolutely one of my favorite designs I've ever done. It's a great way to add some nice home decor flair to your place for not much money, and I have found that these also make amazing presents. These are great gift knits. Everyone that I've given one of these to has responded very enthusiastically to it, and I think it has to do with the fact that it's like not super duper over designed, but it's got some really nice clean details in the finished product. And if you would like a written version of this pattern to follow along instead of a video tutorial, I do have that available. Once again, that's on Ravelry as the custom and cozy knit pillow cover, and I'll put a link to that written pattern in the description as well. If you got something out of this tutorial, I would really appreciate it if you would go ahead and like the video. And if you enjoy knitting tutorials like this in general, I would highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel as well so that you never miss one of these when I upload them. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks for watching. Thanks for knitting along with me, and enjoy your pillow cover. Bye.